Lee. Lee Briese is an independent crop consultant from central North Dakota. He provides agronomic consulting services directly to growers, including fertility, pest management, crop management, precision ag, reduced till, and cover crop management. He was the 2017 International Certified Crop Advisor of the Year and currently serves as chair for the International CCA Board. Lee earned his Doctor of Plant Health from the University of Nebraska and Master of Soil Science and Bachelor of Agriculture, both from North Dakota State University. So let's welcome Lee here this morning.
Yeah, I want to sneak up on the mic here, probably a little bit louder than Yvonne was. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here, folks. I'm going to be kind of chained to the podium, which is new for me, okay? Yeah, I'm setting the stage for me. I'm going to say I'm the prototypical loud American, okay? So you're welcome to suspend your Canadian politeness and interrupt me and ask questions and heckle and all of those fun things. It's totally fine. It's not going to throw me off. I'm here to learn as well. Thanks, Yvonne. It was really a good setup. We did not share slides ahead of time, but you're going to hear some very similar things and some very similar themes from me. I'm going to reiterate those things more than once. I think that's going to be the theme for the day. So here we go. So I was asked to talk about a number of things, and starting with establishment, it seems like the place to go. How do you get these things going? So there's several ways to do it. Here in this picture, you can see that there's different rows of different things. This is just with the disc drill air seeder, the 2 tanks. And so one of the things that if you're new to this, you'll find out that the different seed sizes can become a significant challenge for folks. So in this situation, they put the larger seeded cover crops in one tank and the smaller seeded cover crops in another tank. They changed the rollers and were able to meter them all both at the right level. And they did not need to be intermingled within the row or however. So there's several ways to do this with your equipment. First thing I'm going to say is pick the right species. Because of that seed size difference and the different requirements, they're going to want to be planted at different depths, and they're going to want to be planted at different moisture contents and things like that. And so this is picking species that can tolerate similar conditions, specifically for your planting equipment and your timing of year is really important. So try to get things that commingle well. And I will say, the question is always, drilling versus broadcasting. I wanted to see you try cover crops, so I think that's a benefit and that's a win. So I'm okay with broadcasting, but in the end, folks, we don't broadcast our cash crops for a very specific reason. We don't get very good stands, okay? And so have realistic expectations when you're doing this. So if you want to plant them, drill them in, put them in the soil. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars of pieces of equipment to do that, right, for a reason. So that helps your cover crops just as much as it helps your cash crops. So that, to me, is always the way to do that. And there are some farmers, who here is really happy with a piece of equipment right off the assembly line? Anybody ever take it to the shop and the first thing it sees is the welder or the torch? Right? So farmers are really good at customizing their equipment. And this is a place where that you can do this as well. Like customize your equipment, build your own. If it doesn't exist, make it. And I think that's really the strategy you guys should look at. And then when you are going to broadcast, I'm going to say this probably more than once, try to plan for the right weather. We know that we're going to need rain. We know that we need enough rain to get these things to germinate. And in general, my rule of thumb, this doesn't always stand true, but the smaller the seed, the less rain that it takes in order for that seed to germinate and establish. Okay, so when you're looking at, especially in broadcast situations, if you're looking at things like dwarf Essex rain, a small rain, just enough to wet the soil, might be enough to get that seed to germinate. If you're looking at something like a field pea or Austrian winter pea, it's going to need significantly more moisture in order to germinate and grow. And it's going to have to stay wet for a longer period of time. So that's really what the big part of this establishment is, the timing. And it says plan for rain. And nobody laughed. I mean, you should laugh at that, right? Like you're going to plan for rain. Well, what I'm getting at is because I'm in North Dakota, and I'm just basically straight south of you. So I have that same situation where we can have too much rain or not enough and that whole thing. But in general, we get a reasonable amount of rain in June. In July, who knows? Okay, it may not rain in July the whole month, and that's fairly common. So what I'll say to my growers is, if you're gonna try to plan for rain, you're gonna hedge your bets and go a little bit earlier and shoot for June rather than mid-July. Because we may not get a rain till the end of August. And by the end of August, if your cover crop's been laying on the surface and has not germinated, it gets rain in August, it's not gonna have the potential to do what it needs to do. The time is running too short for us. So I would rather hedge a little bit early on that situation. So that's what I mean by plan for rain. Now, you know, I don't know if your weather forecasters are any better than ours. Hopefully they are, but at least you'll get some indication of that too. So that's something to look forward to. And then the other thing is like, consider your crop. What stage is your crop? And so there's competition, the potential for competition both ways. I think we exaggerate this a little bit too much, but I've seen this in corn systems for us, for certain. So in certain day length corns, it seems like shorter day length corn tends to have less canopy cover, so leakier with light. There's more light getting through my canopy in our shorter day corns. I'm talking about 85 day and less. I'm not sure if you guys use the day ranges or not, but I saw some 72 day corn on the way up. So to me, that would be a little bit leakier for light. Once we get over 96 day corn, which is down south of North Dakota, they tend to canopy better and it's darker in that canopy. Well, your cover crops are plants. They need sunlight, they need water, and they need nutrients. If they're not getting enough sunlight, they're gonna struggle. And so that's just one thing to consider. So we've seen, again, hedging a little bit earlier in a corn situation or some of these heavy canopy crops to give them a little bit of light to get them established can be helpful. In the same effect, if your cover crop's too aggressive, there's only so much light, water, and nutrients to go around. Okay, so be cautious of that and be aware of that too. And I'm gonna pause here just for a second. I should have said this right at the beginning. I'm not from here. I'm telling you what we do, where we do it, and how we do it. Hopefully you can find value in some of this information. But don't think that you can do exactly what I'm telling you to do in Manitoba or on your farm. It is specific to your farm and your conditions. And again, Yvonne's at a really good stage about talking about the context of where we're at. I'm just going to try to share this information. So take and use pieces as you think fit, adjust pieces as you don't, and throw away the ones that you know won't work. Okay? And then the other thing about this timing is cool season versus warm season. When are you planting them? If you're going to plant a cool season grass in the middle of July, it's not going to do very well. It doesn't like that heat. Okay, we know this. Okay. The other thing is that if you're going to plant a warm season at the end of the fall after an early harvested crop of winter wheat, it's going to be challenged because it's getting too cool for that season. So try to keep them in the seasons where they belong. And those things are well described. And if you have questions about whether it's a cool season or warm season, Google's your friend. I'm sure Yvonne has information. I will have information. You can find that fairly easily. So there's different windows, and I'm gonna say 3 windows that we're tend to using. We're using them at planting, we're using them mid-season, and then we're using them after harvest. That's what I'm gonna say for our windows. And so this is an example of an at planting situation. This was a reactionary thing. So this field was intended to be corn this year. Rain, and more rain, and it got way too late in order to plant corn. It's a new piece of land, so the insurance was not there for the farmer, so he had to plant a crop. The only thing we had time for was soybean, but we had already applied all the fertilizer for corn. And if you know much about soybeans, when you give them lots of nitrogen, you have lots of problems. White mold, lodging, disease problems, all kinds of issues. So we planted wheat with the soybean. And the idea with the wheat was to take up that excess nitrogen that we had applied to try to protect the soybeans from too much growth and white mold and other diseases. And so we allowed that wheat to grow and do that. And it seemed to work. Still yet to be harvested because it's been one of those falls. But it seemed to work really well. The wheat was very green and very aggressive. And if you know something about soybeans, early season competition for soybean is not that big of a deal. So we managed it as we went. But this is an example of reactionary, but we had to make a decision. This wasn't planned ahead. But the goal was to make the soybean crop better. So going back to that goal, you always have to set that.
You said you had to manage it in season. What did you do?
Well, I just say when we terminated it in season. So we used the Extend technology soybean, which has dicamba label for it. And so we did a pre-application of that herbicide before this crop was up, and dicamba was also labeled on wheat. Not at that rate, but it doesn't kill the wheat. okay? So it made it sick. Had we needed another herbicide application during the season, we could have used dicamba alone again, and we didn't until later, and we waited the time frame as long as we could, we thought, to terminate the weed from there with glyphosate. So you had to continuously watch that and manage the moisture. Had we dried up, we would have killed it much sooner, because it would have been taking away one of the three main things that plants need: water, nutrients, and sunlight, right? So the sunlight wasn't that important, but we just managed the water. And since we had a lot of water, we actually helped us to have that wheat burning extra moisture in that soybean crop. Go for it.
At what stage did you terminate the wheat?
The wheat was heading out, but it had not flowered. So again, I'm not telling you when to do it, I'm telling you we did that based on water. The other reason we did it at that time frame is that wheat's going to use less water now that it's turning into reproductive stage, right? So the benefits of that was less. And the timing was appropriate. We were still on label within the soybean, so that's how we did it. This picture is a little bit hard to see what's going on. This is a stab at some intercropping that we did this year. And again, this was planted at the same time. This was flax planted with field pea, and the flax was hoping to hold the field pea up. So I have a grower that loves his field peas, but he hates harvesting them at that height. Okay, anybody have that issue? Like, that's how tall they are at harvest? And you want a vacuum cleaner attachment, like a Hoover header would be good. And so that's been the challenge. And we know that flax has strong straw strength, grows really well. Flax is actually tolerant to a lot of the herbicides that field peas are tolerant to. So we had a window of opportunity in there. And so we planted them together, and he tried a couple of different rates. Again, trials, I'm talking 5 acres, 10 acres, not 5,000 acres, okay? So this is a little trial in the field. And the peas did what we wanted them to do. They tied into the flax. You can see it here, the tendrils wrapping around the flax. The flax did help to hold them up. Yeah, it was a little bit of a harvest timing issue. We'd like to get a little bit earlier season flax next time. So that's something we learned. But instead of being this tall where we didn't have the flax, it was this tall. Well, that's a significant change in harvestability. So it's a cover crop because we're not going to harvest it. We're not going to sell the flax. That was none of the plan. However, flax seeds is small enough that you could separate it from the field peas. And he's going to try to do that and use that for his cover crop. This is another one that was done at planting time. And this is barley seeded in a saline area, and the rest of the field was seeded to soybean. And this again was done with a disc drill with 2 tanks. The front tank had the soybean, which was the main crop, and instead of having the fertilizer like you would normally have 1152 in the back, we put barley in there. And then when he went through the saline spots, he turned the barley on. We knew that the soybeans were not going to grow very well. They're not going to do well. They don't do well in saline. So rather than letting kochia and foxtail barley grow, we planted barley. And again, pre-application of herbicides, we were able to find things that caused a little bit of headache for the barley, but didn't kill it, okay? And allowed it to go right through there. And the barley was bin run, cover crop type stuff. It wasn't $100 an acre, kind of like soybean seed is. What I wanted him to do was shut the soybeans off. But this guy is the eternal optimist. He says, well, maybe they'll grow. 9 years later, and they haven't grown there yet. And the 7 years before that, but maybe they'll grow, you know, so I understand that, but what I wanted him to do was shut the soybean off, turn the barley on. Yeah. Instead, he just turned the barley on, that's fine. So instead of solid weeds, I had a cover crop competing in that scenario. And it's very small because the saline areas reduce the ability of plants to grow, all of them. So the resources that were left over were taken up by the barley. We had very little kochia in that spot. Switching a little bit to mid-season. Most of the mid-season stuff that we're doing is in corn. Maybe you're interested, maybe you're not. I think you can do some of this stuff in spring wheat and things like that. It's just a little bit different. So what we're doing is we found that plan for rain type of thing is that we're better off going in June rather than aerial applied in July. So in this corn situation, we're coming back with a top dress nitrogen anyway. And so again, it's a 2-bin machine. The fertility's in the front bed, the cover crop's in the back tank, and we're broadcasting this into standing corn at about V5 to V8. So about the right timing for the fertility. That's a little bit too early for the cover crop. So the cover crop could get going and get established, it could be a problem. We have not seen that be a problem yet, but it's something to consider. Because corn still doesn't like competition at that time. And if you've used herbicides, there will be residuals. So you have to pick cover crops that will fit into your herbicide. Okay? We've been using cereal rye, winter rye as the main piece of that part, and it's been the one thing that we've really done, and actually the grower's gone to the point where he's actually variable rating that rye across it. And this is a setup for soybean for the next year. We're trying to get the cereal rye for water management for the year, this year, and then weed management for next year. So with that water management, we don't want too much cereal rye on the hills and we want more in the low spots. So we're changing 15 pounds on the top, 30 pounds on the side hill, 60 to 70 pounds on the low spot. And then by doing it at the timing that we're doing it, the corn takes off, we give it fertilizer. When it rains, the fertilizer goes in, the corn takes off faster, the cover crop gets established, and then it gets really spindly and long. It's 3 leaf and it's this long and it snakes across the ground because it's looking for every ray of sunlight. It's being severely challenged. But it's also competing for weeds, and it's better than water hemp. I hope you never learn about water hemp. So this is again in the cornfield. This is just a different spot and a different grower, different species, and it didn't quite work. They don't always work. I don't know what the odds are, but I would say 1 out of 3 times we've had things that we're not happy with. So 30% failure rate. It depends on what you describe as failure, but be ready for that, okay? This is radish and turnip along with the rye, aerial seeded. We think that the crickets ate most of the seed. We had this tremendous amount of crickets this year. They were everywhere. Crickets like to eat seeds, which is good because they eat weed seeds, but they ate our cover crop seeds, and this is what we ended up first time. So my third window is at harvest time, and I do mean at harvest. I don't actually mean after harvest. This is the whole thing where the drill is in the same field as the combine, and typically with a lot of harvested crops, it's too wet in the morning, early on. There's too much dew to really get going, and you start a little bit later, so there's opportunity in there to run the drill in the early morning in that same field right after the combine is going and seed your cover crop. Again, talking about limited time frame. You only have so many days to put this in the ground, right? And so many days of growth after that. So try to maximize it as much as you can. We've actually gone in a few situations to reducing the length of the crops that we're growing for a cash crop if the yield penalty is small. So we've seen that with soybean, that some of the short season soybean varieties can yield equal or nearly as equal to the longer season varieties. So we're switching a few fields or a field in order to get the cover crop started earlier. And we're picking on certain fields that have problems. Again, this goes back to Yvonne's goals. We know that there's a problem with that field. We'll pick that field and put a shorter season crop on it to try to get the cover crop in earlier. So here's a little bit of an experiment I did this year about timing and herbicides. I'm not really going to talk about the herbicide interactions because I'm still working on that. We had acres that didn't get planted. They're barren. I'm driving by and I'm frustrated because I'm getting hundreds of phone calls literally about cover crops, about species, when do I put them, how much, what herbicides can I use with them, and I don't have good answers. And I was complaining to my crew that day, like, how come nobody does research on this? Well, we drove by a barren spot. I said, well, that's not that hard. Let's do something. So this isn't really research, but this was a little trial that we threw in kind of last minute. And you'll see there's not a whole lot of time difference there. And on the July time frame, this is the same mix, folks. Planted exactly the same mixture of things. There's very different species in there. The brassicas took over in that earlier seeding, and were dominant in that mixture. The same seeding 7 days later, and the oats and the grasses were dominant in that mixture. Timing is important. Having the right type of crop at the right time. And then this was the year where it rained every 5 days. So it wasn't a rain thing, okay? It was simply a timing thing. And so you can have different expectations on a different year and a different situation. But the brassicas got really aggressive earlier on.
Is that partly due to flea beetles and their cycle?
We had flea beetles, but they were not aggressive enough to cause a lot of damage. I did see them out there, but we didn't see any seedling death on them. They had a little bit of feeding, and it really wasn't that significant. Like the brassicas grew through the pollen. I had kale, dwarf Essex rape, radish, and turnip, and all blew through the flea beetles. So yeah, I was out here a lot more than I should have been. So, but it was one of those things. And then here, okay, that was the 7-day difference. So so I continuously broadcast cover crops on this plot every 7 days for about 6 weeks, I think it was. And so here's the difference of 5 weeks. and what that made in growth. And this is why I'm telling you that the drill should be right behind the combine, okay? If you want significant growth, the earlier that cover crop gets in, the more advantage you get. Because we all know that a day in late October is not the same as a day in late August, right? They're not the same days. So taking advantage of those opportunities. This is the same mix. Again, it rained every 5 days, did the same thing, and we had good establishment in the one. And granted, there's a lot of brassica in that too. Timing is critical.
And broadcast arrows or just broadcast?
Just broadcast. This is my ATV with a broadcaster on the back. This is no-till with heavy residue from Snirt the fall before. So rain was my friend this year. Like, it rained a lot. And that was a big part of it. And you would not expect those. I'm talking about drilling to get your cover crops to grow, and I'm showing all these broadcast pictures of how awesome they are. Okay, so this is this year in my area, this one time, everything worked, and it was glorious because I got a lot of data off. So let's move into a little bit of a management discussion. I'm going to say this again. Pick the right species. And I'm going to say that I don't have a problem with exotic species, but especially if you're new to this, pick things you know. Stay close to home kind of thing. You know, barley, oats, flax, clovers, field peas. You know what they are, you know how to plant them, you know kind of what rates to plant them at, you know what depth to plant them at. If you need to terminate them, you know how to terminate them. Okay? I'm not against things like Phacelia, Camelida, Carinata. And if you're looking at me going, what the heck is that? Okay, that's an issue. Those things are more advanced type cover crops that have more specific needs that I think you're better off later on. And they can be fairly expensive. So start with things that are easy. Things that you can grow on your farm in that 2-acre plot that never does very good anyway, or it's a pain to get into. Grow your own seed on that. Nothing wrong with that. But having the right species is really important. And this goes into the herbicide thing. So I hear this a lot with folks. They'll come to me and say, I want to grow cover crops on my crop. What can I spray to leave room for X cover crop? And I'll say, I think you're thinking about it in the wrong way. Because the point of the herbicide is to control the weeds that are already there. That's the point of the herbicide. So you start with the weeds that you have. Because if you pick the herbicide that does not do well in those weeds, guess what? You're going to have the weeds. Because the seed's already there, and they have biological advantages for how they grow in those fields. So what I tell growers is always pick the cover crop to fit the herbicide and never the other way around. And you can do this because herbicides don't necessarily kill everything all the time. They're selective. They kill certain things or they manage certain things in different ways. So you can manage that, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. The other thing to keep in mind is that they're still plants. Okay? They like good fertility. They respond to fertility. And if you're using starter fertilizer and you have a good fertilizer base, your cover crops are going to do better. And the stuff that we saw that was prevented plant this year that we never got to in a broadcast cover crops to, and the fertility was low, the cover crops did not do that well. It's not a surprise. They're still plants. They still like nutrients. And they also get sick. This is something to be keeping in mind and to be very considerate of. This goes back to picking the right species. Things like clubroot in areas that grow canola are a problem. You don't want to increase that disease by planting a turnip or a radish. Don't plant that. There's other cover crops that can do similar things. Just stay away from those types of things. And don't add risks that you don't need to. Things like cereal rye are really good at adding weed streak mosaic, and that can be a complete loss. And there's no recovery from that. So think about what pests you normally have in your crops, and then match up how your cover crops fit with your cash crops. If they're closely related, there's a higher percentage chance that they're going to have these diseases. Same is true of insects. So keep in mind of that, because your cover crop can be a harbor for all of these things. We talk about they're a harbor for beneficial insects, for sure. But they're also a harbor for the other insects. So being understanding of what pests you have that you're managing on your acre is important. And then at times they can become weeds. Question about it.
You have sort of a rotation where you have a cereal 1 year and strawberries the next year. You want to have a cover crop in between. And to use the seasons for the say strawberries the next year between you have to grow grass again and cover crop. And that sort of is like how we would see the
missed the last part. So you're talking about a 2-crop rotation with Nebraska and the grain, and then having the broadleaf in the cover crop.
Let's say you're planting the broadleaf next year,
Okay?
okay? So then diseases who are suggesting do not have a broadleaf in the cover crop.
No, I'm not saying not have a broadleaf. I'm saying not have the type of broadleaf. So if, let's say your broadleaf next year is going to be canola, if you planted clover, that's a very different plant type, and it's not going to be the same disease harbor as radish would be.
Right, but let's say white mold is quite common.
Well, white mold is everywhere, and I don't think we're going to find a whole lot outside of, pretty much every broadleaf crop is going to have problems with white mold, but there's other ways to manage that white mold. So timing is going to be part of it, and density of that other crop is going to be part of it. So if you reduce the density of your broadleaf crop, you can reduce your chances of white mold
So in mixture with grass.
in mixture with other things, right? I like a small mixture in general. And we'll get to a little bit of my theory on how I want to have different species in a mixing. And we can talk a little bit more about it. But so just be mindful of what you're doing. And I've seen this with 2 cover crops in general, that they can surprise people, especially when you're not ready for them. And the one I'll say is hairy vetch. And because of this, it has a very hard seed coat, okay? And hairy vetch growth early is fairly small and not very aggressive, and it just kind of hangs out. And then all of a sudden, mid-season, it turns into this monstrosity. And that's wonderful if you're a grazer. Like, you're thrilled about this growth, okay? If it's a weed in your wheat crop, you're not thrilled about this growth. Okay, and that can happen, and because the hard seed is there, it will lay dormant in the soil for more than 1 year, up to 3, 4, 5 years, and you can suddenly have hairy vetch all of a sudden everywhere, past the point where you can use herbicides to manage it, and it's late in your crop, and it causes a harvest issue, it causes a quality issue, because the size of the hairy vetch seed is very similar to wheat. It becomes a problem, okay? So keep that in mind. The second one that I'll say that I think can catch people off guard is annual ryegrass. Yeah, that's a very fast-growing, good sod producer. It's great for erosion type things. It produces a ton of seed. And again, that seed just continuously germinates and is very aggressive. We've also seen a fair amount of herbicide resistance in annual ryegrass, normal things. And then just times when it's not very susceptible. The herbicide would still kill it, but for some reason it doesn't work very well. So those are 2 that I would say are advanced cover crops. Like if you're into this, and you know what you're getting into, and you can handle a few volunteers, great. If this is your first foray, I would say don't go after those. Like, leave those on the shelf for a while. What am I doing for time? So, I want to talk a little bit about, okay, well, so this is the other reason that we're using cover crops. This is supposed to be a soybean field. It is actually a kochia field. And it's just one of those things where this soybean was not a good choice for this field, but we found that we can really do a good job of suppressing kochia with a winter cereal rye. It's a very effective tool for us. It lasts for a long time. It's cheaper than herbicides. It has more residual than herbicides, and it's a great idea. And so we're using it a lot. And that was kind of an accidental discovery, because at the time I wasn't paying a lot of attention to cover crops and weed suppression. I'll have a few pictures later. Again, with your termination now, so we've gone into the establishment, we've done a little bit about management. So how do you get rid of them? Well, I kind of got them in order there, how we do this. But I'm going to say it again, it depends on the species, right? So if you pick the species, like frost, termination is the main one that we're using in North Dakota. It's free and it's done. Okay? Now, this year, because the harvest is so late, I'm going to pick species that are frost tolerant, or things like cereal rye is going to go in my mix, because I want to move water. Like, we have too much moisture. I want to move water next spring. I want it to survive over winter and be there next spring to help us with water management. So that goal is part of the issue with this too. But frost is the main one that we use. The second one that we use is herbicides, and glyphosate would be the #1 termination herbicide out there, because it's non-selective and it doesn't have residual. Timing is important, and what you're doing at the timing of termination. Like glyphosate itself doesn't work very well in cool weather, or if you've had any injury to the crop. So we've seen this happen where growers have green seeded into cereal rye with soybean, and that causes a little disturbance to the cover crop. It causes some injury, and the glyphosate doesn't work very well. So you might want to time your timing a little bit advanced or a little bit back to just give yourself a little bit of room. The way herbicides work the best when the plant is happy and growing rapidly, so you consider that. Tillage works. Again, I would say good tillage, like there's kind of tillage and there's good tillage, like vertical tillage is not going to kill your cover crop, it's not going to work. War and shovels, you're going to be disappointed in. Okay, there's going to be a lot of gaps, a lot of issues with that. Mulch plowing may be too aggressive for what you're doing. However, just fit it into your system, your farming system. What are your goals? Where are you going with this? And make sure that you terminate it appropriately. Things like drought tolerant crops, they don't necessarily die just because you tilled them. And one little root's hanging on there and he finds a little piece of soil, a little bit of water, that thing comes back. Anybody seen that? It happens, okay? So I don't think tillage is 100%. I don't think any of these are 100%. Even frost, I've seen turnips live through North Dakota winter. They should be dead, but if they live. The crimping, again, timing is critical, and that's usually been done with like cereal rye and that early anthesis timing, and that's really important for that physiology of the plant. Mowing and grazing can be helpful, but it depends on the type of cover crop and the timing. So this is another situation where we use this cover crop as an aid to the crop. This is a soybean field that has iron chlorosis deficiency, and you can see what this is a skip where the barley cover crop was planted. So that's my foot, and outside of the barley is the soybeans that are this tall due to iron chlorosis, iron inavailability, and inside the barley the soybeans are this tall. The barley is unique in that it helps the soybean get the iron. It's better than adding the fertilizer, it's 3 times cheaper, and it's not hard to do. So we added it, put it in there, and then we allowed that soybean to get larger, and then soybean root structure gets better, it's less susceptible to iron chlorosis later on, and we terminated that cover crop in season with glyphosate. We could have done it with Liberty, we could have done it with a number of other conventional grass herbicides like Select, Post, Clethodims, and a number of options for this. Go ahead.
Was the issue more nitrate or high water?
All of the above. So iron chlorosis is one of those things that's accentuated by several things. You name them all. High nitrates, high water table, high pH, and high salinity can all add to iron chlorosis. So the barley was taking up water, taking up nitrogen, and then also we all know that plants do exude things into the soil. And one of the things that plant roots exude is hydrogen ions. Because hydrogen ions will lower pH in a very narrow root zone. And we saw in this situation where the barley was intermingled with the soybean roots, the soybeans did much better than where they were just off. So this grower didn't have the disc drill that I talked about earlier, and so he actually planted the barley and then turned around and planted the soybeans. So not every time did the soybeans intersect with the barley. And we can see that when they were about 3 to 4 inches away, we had less effect. Luckily for me, he had skips, so I had pictures like this. And the barley cost us $6. The soy green chelated iron was $36 an acre. And we got a better result.
And that's not impacting you.
Didn't, I don't know yet. For this year, last year it did not. It did not. So, but here's the thing, with iron chlorosis in soybean, the first recommendation is don't plant the soybean. Literally, that's the first recommendation, because it's very susceptible to it. The second is better to plant a better variety. This would be the third management option.
Kind of rate reason on the barley?
A bushel. My numbers are a bushel pretty much across the board, and it's easy math. It costs $5 a bushel, it's $5 for the barley, and $7 for the rye, and boom. We'll get into a few rates here in a little bit if I don't go too long. So this is the grain grazing mosing. This is millet. This was actually a cover crop because it was supposed to be planted into a catch crop. It had all been fertilized for catch crop, and it turned out we couldn't plant it. Mid-season, like, what can we plant? Hey, millet grows pretty good, so we planted that in there. And this was terminated with mowing. And they rolled it up, baled it, hauled it off. So is it really a cover crop? No, I guess at that point it's a forage crop. But in that sense, this works for millet. Cutting it off and hauling it away is fine. Not every plant's going to die like this. And we've seen this with cereal rye. We're double cropping a little bit with cereal rye. Plant it in the fall, hay it off, and then plant soybean later into it. The rye comes back. Not 100% back, but about 60% back. So it's still a weed, it's still an issue, it's still a management issue. So cutting cereal rye is not that effective. Cutting millet at this stage, it's done. Now, if you cut grasses before the growing point is high enough that you don't cut the growing point, guess what? They're not dead. Okay? Broadleaves can have growing points all along the stem. This is alfalfa, right? You cut alfalfa, is it dead? No. Okay, clover is the same kind of thing, right? It may or may not be, based on where you cut it, what stage it's at, that kind of thing. So be conscious of that when you're picking your species. How are you going to terminate? Have your plan. How are you going to get out of this? How are you going to get out of this if it's not going ready? Have that plan first. And select your species based on that plan. What tools do you have? So we'll get a little bit into rates now. This is what I call my gateway cover crops, kind of like the gateway drug, right? These are the ones that I think are easy or easier, and I think this is a good place for people to start. I would add flax to that now, but flax has a few peccadillos. I don't know that it's necessarily a gateway cover crop. For you folks, I think it is. In North Dakota, it's been decades and generations since people have grown flax, so it's not quite as familiar, okay? The winter cereal rye, this is what I'm talking about. I'm never talking about annual rye because I'm worried about it being a weed. So I'm talking about winter seeded cereal rye. And you can seed that mid-season, mid-summer, early spring. It does need a vernalization. Approximately 3 to 5% of those will go to head anyway. But we did that this year with some of our prevented plant ground that we couldn't get in, it was too wet. We seeded cereal rye way early, and it grew about this tall for most of the season. And it continued to grow. That was what we wanted. We wanted more moisture use. So that's a quick tool for that. It's fairly inexpensive. You can grow your own seed. It's the most winter hardy thing I've ever seen. Like literally, most winter hardy thing I've ever seen. They have all kinds of new varieties. There's a few new ones coming out of Carrington. They tend to be fairly expensive. We're using the old bin run dog that we don't even know what it is. It's variety not stated. I have no idea what it is, where it came from, and it's cheap. Okay? Radishes are another easy one. They're fairly easy to get hold of. I would not suggest growing your own seed on this. This is a challenge, but getting radish seed, not that hard. Turnip to me is the same kind of thing as a radish. They're very closely related, and I would say I would pick them for two different reasons. If you're going to graze, I'd like to see you have turnips, because they tend to be more above ground, and the cow can get to that weedy part of the turnip better. If you just want it as a cover crop, and you want water movement, or you want soil penetration, I would pick the radish. I think it does that better. That's the difference. And I don't think you need both, because I think they do such a similar thing that you don't need both. One will cover the bases. Oats, another easy one. You can talk about naked oats or black oats, and there's little differences in how they compete with weeds and how they grow, but the oats that you have is better than no cover crop, and it's a lot cheaper than $17 a pound type of stuff. So, no problems with that. And again, barley, I think, has its own specifics. We used to think that barley was the best thing in saline areas. We're now seeing that some of the oats varieties are fairly strong as well. So I think those are interchangeable. I used to recommend barley as just, that's your salinity thing. I'm moving more to oats as well. Again, the goals. You're going to hear that again. Why are you hearing that again from two different speakers from two different countries? Because it's important. Okay? Have your goals. These are the goals that I have for the growers that I work with. Basically, kind of in that order. Here's what I'm talking about. We need to manage this water. So here's the tillage and here's the no-till. Like, cool, the no-till is better, but it's still too wet. Okay? So too much is too much, right? That is salinity, that is not snow. I have the same problem. My soils are white, my snow is black. That's an issue. We want to flip that if we can. Okay? This is a saline desert. Nothing grows here. Like nothing literally grows here. So here's some of the species that I picked for these situations. This is not necessarily set up as a mix. This is more a kind of individual rates. Because I have a singular goal. And I'm not saying that you can't use other things to do this, but if you want something to carry over, like I talked about with water, we want to use water next spring, I'm going to use the cereal rye because it's going to live through the winter. Okay? If I didn't want that, I want something that will frost kill, we're talking about the barley or the oats. The radishes can be good, but timing is critical. If you go too early with radishes, and I found that out in my test plot, about early July, they tend to be more top growth, and they'll put on seed, and not much of a root, like it's this big. And 7 days later, the root was this big. It was monstrous. So timing is critical on that thing. It goes, I would say my observations, and this is not scientific, when the soybean started to flower is about when the radish would not go to flower. So it has to do with the day length. I don't know specifically what time that is, but it's related to that. So later in July, you're going to get more bottom growth. Early July, you could risk top growth and seed production. And then sugar beet is really tolerant. But don't buy sugar beet seed unless it's leftover carryover out the door. Because this stuff is stupid expensive. But it's fairly tolerant once it gets a little bit bigger. The nicer thing about sugar beet, I think it's a little more water tolerant, flood tolerant than radish and turnip. And in the saline areas, you tend to have a lot of water. Here's my other goal. This is no-till. It's no-till for 15 years. This is not no-till, but this is a goal. I don't want to see this anymore. We're farming the bedrock. Why? So I've done this slide different ways. I've taken the date off of it and I put it in black and white and I'll fade it into color. After I put up the pictures from the dirty 30s, I'll do the same thing with this slide. Almost 100 years ago, we should have learned something now. But did we? Folks, I'm in an area that's 80 to 90% no-till. These soybean fields on both sides of that road have been no-till for years. They've also been soybean for years. Here's my black snow. Got lots of pictures of this. This is important. This is critical. If we don't have soil, where are we going to put the plants? Where's your best fertility? On the bottom or the top? Yeah, good question. So, for erosion management, I want quick cover, I want good cover, and it doesn't necessarily have to be thick cover. It just needs to be enough to hold the soil down. So that's going to depend on where you're at, okay? I like oats. Oats is frost kill, it's fairly rapid growth, it has a really nice root structure, and I can put it on some very light sandy soils where I don't want to burn a whole lot of water, okay? And we've seen that the next spring when we have good residue cover, we get less evaporation off of that water, that soil. So we're using oats to both use water and save water, depending on the soil. If that soil is sandy and on the hilltop, it's prone to evaporation, you cover it. It's like a little bit of a cellophane covering, and you keep some of that moisture. You don't keep all of it, but you keep some of it. The barley is in there. The flax we're using because, again, low water use is fairly saline tolerant. I can put it underneath that. It just doesn't grow a whole lot. The other thing is that strong stalk in the fall. Even when the flax doesn't get mature, it still has very strong straw string, and it's helping us catch snow, especially in those spots. So we're trying to catch the snow so it stays there and melts. CRI is kind of a double-edged sword. It can use a lot of water in the spring, so you got to be careful with that. And that's one of the main things that we decide when we're going to terminate the CRI is the moisture content of the soil. And I would say if you're out there and you're feeling it, you're like, I could go in 2 weeks, kill your CRI. Because it takes time for it to die. Okay? If you say, well, I can go in about 4 days, you're too late. You'll be dry by the time it dies.
Can I just ask a question about that? Is that not kind of a stressful thing too? Because you never know what you're going to get. So now if you're 2 weeks out ahead,
Yeah.
and then you kill it, and then it gets wet, and that thing is supposed to be sucking moisture if it's wet. Like it seems easier when people talk about it than it would be in reality.
Well, it's very true. And so the question is, what if I killed it too soon and then I get wet and I wanted it growing? So what I've seen is it's actually been better for us in our geography to err on the early side and kill too early. Because it's more likely for us to be drier than it is to be wetter. And one of the things that helps us is the trafficability. So that heavy root growth and that sod formation of those roots tends to give us trafficability. So we can drive out there when it's a little bit too wet and we still plant into it. It doesn't flow very well. So the furrow closing is still a challenge and still an issue. So we're still going to need water after that. But I think it does make a difference. I would rather kill it earlier than have dry soil, planting into dry soil, because now you are totally at the mercy of rainfall for your crop to emerge. That's been the best hedge for our bed. Been to Ontario, and they will contradict me every time. And they will say, we get rain all the time, it's always going to be wet. I will never kill my cereal rye again at this height. Terrible idea. because it lays over dead, it does that sealing of the soil, nothing evaporates, and it stays wet the rest of the spring. So they'll either kill it this big or this big. Depends where you're at, depends on your goals, depends on what problems you're managing. If you tend to be dry, hedge early. If you tend to be wet, hedge late. That would be my recommendation. This was the trip that got me into cover crops. Like, I had been doing saline management, and I told the guy, don't even bother planting soybeans in the ground. It won't grow. It's not worth it. I'll save you $150 an acre. And it was true. I convinced the guy to plant cereal rye into it because he just had it. This is like 12 or 13 years ago. The next spring I come out, and here we are. No herbicides have been applied. Soybeans are seeded on the one side. The rye is seeded on the other side. You see a line there? Because I see a line there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do or not, but does kosher grow that way naturally? Is that normal? No. Ooh, it's not normal. So here's the kosher not in the rye. Here's the kosher in the rye. That little guy right there. Now, the other thing about this rye is it's not very thick, right? You can see a gopher running under 100 yards in here. Okay, this is not a lot. This rye was really aggressive on the kosher. I'm like, wow, how much did you spend on the rye? Like $3. Holy crap. We got $30 worth of herbicide control for $3 worth of rye. I want to do lots of this. We did it over time. Tried it again next year. Tried it on different fields. Got growers trying it. Pretty soon I got growers doing this planting green thing like all over the place. And we found that not only does rye suppress kochia, it suppresses water hemp very effectively, and it's also helpful for common ragweed. 3 of the weeds that have the most herbicide resistance in my territory. For $5 to $10, and rye gets a little more expensive once everybody catches on to this, but for $3 to $10, I'm getting $30 to $50 worth of weed control. And it's not just this early season thing, because water hemp is a late season grower. This is, again, this rye. You can seed right into it. He's seeding into it as tall. We had plenty of moisture at this time. The soybean came up really well, and certain crops are going to tolerate this better than others. Never do this with corn in my recommendation. Never, ever. Okay? Dry beans, probably should be dead before you plant. Okay? Soybean, not so much. It's going to depend. Canola, I have no idea. It's been 15 years since I've had canola. This is how thin it was. This is 12 pounds of cereal rye per acre. It's not necessarily my recommendation, but the growers are like, that's what I had it set at, that's what I planted it at, whatever. And it's equal. Anybody garden? Yeah. Plant trees? What do you use around the tree for weed control? Mulch? Anybody see mulch in this picture? This is the cereal rye 2 weeks later after we killed it. There's the soybeans growing. This is better than fabric, folks. This is self-deteriorating. It goes away. This is late season. It's still there. This is over 2 months worth of weed control. There is not a herbicide in the world that will give you 2 months worth of weed control. These are the ones I tend to recommend for weed control. Cereal rye is the main one. Oats is a strong second. Buckwheat I've played with, and I know that you guys know more about it than I do if you're organic, and I'd love to talk more about buckwheat. It's very competitive. Goes to seed fast, so my conventional growers are a little nervous about it. Okay, that's where they're at. Like, I can get them to do a little bit, and then they terminate right away. I'm like, come on, we just had butterflies. What are you doing? My last goal, and I'm going to talk about diversity. This is the rainbows and puppies fluffy thing. Okay? It is. And you laugh, because you know it's true, right? What does diversity mean? How much is enough? How much is too much? You know, what's the deal? Here's my suggestion. It's just my suggestion. I've stolen this from somebody else. I don't even remember who it did. I can't give them appropriate credit, but if you've seen it somewhere else, it's probably their idea. Okay? 5 food groups I do. Cool season, warm season, broadleaf grasses and legumes. It's like your meal, your plate, okay? As long as you have that diversity, you're getting those nutrients, you're getting that response, you're getting that biological benefit. Do you need to eat broccoli and kale and spinach all at one time? Not necessarily, okay? So this is my suggestion. You don't necessarily have to eat them every day, You don't need to have 7 different species of it. I think that there's functional redundancy where they do kind of the same thing. Like we talked about with turnip and radish, I think they do very similar things. Yes, there's differences, but I don't know that they're that important. Okay? So in my world, with corn and soybean, we have a warm season grass, a warm season broadleaf, and the soybean's also a legume. We got 3 out of 5. We had cereal rye and radish. I got 5 food groups, and I've seen huge responses over time to just those 2 cover crops in this situation. It adds a lot of diversity from a biological standpoint. It adds a lot of diversity from a timing standpoint, like Yvonne was talking about. It can be very powerful. What are your goals? If you don't know what you're trying to do, it's really hard to pick what you want to get, where you're going to go. I usually recommend 5 species or less. And I usually keep them close to home. Like if you want to play with cool things like Facility and you love bees, absolutely plant Facility. They love it. It's amazing. What are your goals? Here's a general thing. For the grasses, half a bushel to a bushel. That's a trial and error thing. Most of you have rate controllers where you can punch it in as you're going, and you can try a few different strips across the field, and you can skip over and leave a strip, and that's the best thing you can do is just play with it and see what you think. But I tend to go on the lower end. Now, if you want weed control, I can justify more. If you want grazing, you definitely need to plant more. Okay? If you want forage, you definitely need to plant more. But if you're just looking for the cover crop to be there and give you some biological benefit, it needs to be there, it needs to be at a certain level, but it doesn't have to be a jungle that you need a machete to walk through. And the brassicas, people get really carried away with brassicas. They're very small seeds, and there's hundreds of thousands of seeds in a pound, so be careful with that. They can get really aggressive and take over your mix. That's kind of our diversity mix. You'll notice those are all frost kill. The field pea, the grower grows the field peas. I would not put them in normally because they're expensive and they're a large seed. But he grows them, so he puts them on there. You could substitute clovers, but I haven't had really good luck with clover. I'm running out of time. There's information out there, folks. This meeting's probably one of the best places to trade business cards, trade phone numbers, talk to neighbors, talk to people who are in here, talk to organic growers, talk to conventional growers, because then we need to have that conversation because we're all farmers. Okay? We're doing a lot of the same things. Agronomy is agronomy. There's a lot of things that are in there. So share information. And the other thing I'll say, and this is a shameless plug for North Dakota. We have a meeting coming up in December. We'd love to see some of you folks come to. I'm going to set a few of these on the back table. Unfortunately, I don't have enough to hand out. If you can't make the meeting in December, there is a podcast that is available online that talks about soil health, cover crops, a part of it, reduced tillage, that kind of thing. And you can listen to this in the car or on your phone. And I will put a few of these in the back. Again, I don't have enough. I would strongly recommend, if you can't make it to North Dakota, definitely listen to the podcast. If you can, listen to the podcast. This is available. This is USDA cover crop chart. If you Google that, you'll have tons of information to get you really started. The other thing is there's these guides that are put up by the Midwest Cover Crop Council that you can get. They're free. I bet Yvonne's got a stack of them. If not, she knows where to get them. This is the online thing. It's kind of defunct right now because they're doing a new website, but this will help you pick cover crops based on your goals. And then there's this little hidden page on the NDSU Soil Health website. This is something that I threw together because I get so many questions. This is a cross-reference about cousins. Who's related to whom? Okay? If you have herbicides in your system, it's very useful because you can use this. You can cross-reference dwarf Essex rape is like canola, is like wild mustard. So then when you look through your herbicide guards and you see that this herbicide is excellent at controlling wild mustard and it's 36-month rotation restriction to canola, guess what? Dwarf Essex rape is probably a bad bet. Okay? If you look at a different herbicide that has very poor weed control and no crop rotation restrictions, then dwarf Essex rape might fit in that herbicide. So this is available. And just puts them in families and common names, and so they're kind of color-coded, and that will help you figure out these guys are similar. That's a whole hour-long discussion, and usually people glaze over when I do that one. But if you have questions, you can find me on Twitter or that kind of thing. Up in the corner, you can direct message me on that. And with that, I'm out of time. Maybe a question. I will be here the rest of the day.
What's the name of the podcast?
What's the name of the podcast? The podcast is ndsoilsense.com. And because I don't have enough of these, if you take a picture with your cell phone or write it down, I should have brought a ton of these. I didn't think about it. But that's where it is. There's like 14 of them. And they're with growers, they're with extension personnel, they're with consultants. It's very well done.
Could I ask your rationale for why you limit it to 5? You said you're in your mix, you like
Expense.
Expense.
Expense is the first one. I don't have a problem with 20, 30, 40 weight mixtures. But then we're starting to get into this density thing. If you're putting a 1/4 pound of sunflowers out there, you're getting 3 sunflowers in the size of this room. Okay? And so I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that diversity. I'm not saying that. But I'm more on the starter and the intermediate. If you're on the advanced level, you go as far as you want to go. But understand what you're getting for that price. So I know I've seen growers that put 30 weight mixes out, they're applying 30 to 50 pounds per acre because that's about what they can afford, and the density is very low. Yeah, and I think that's kind of an issue. To get some of the biological benefit, we need to have a minimum density.
So you'd rather err on a higher density of a smaller variety?
Yeah, I
to
think
have
so.
a greater impact?
Yeah, trying to get the impact. And there's research that shows that 2, 3, 4, or even 1 cover crop can provide as much biological benefit as a multi-species mix, but then there are some things that one species simply cannot do, so you can look at it in both ways. But if you don't have enough of them, the impact is really hard to get.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if you had any data or research on 60-inch corn, the biomass because of more
The
sunlight
60-inch corn.
and the reduced corn yield.
That's really hot right now. And no, I don't. So I am not a farmer because I'm a little bit too risk averse. Truth. And the thing is that in my recommendations, I'm risk averse in my growth. That's my job, is to help them manage risk. So I tend to watch first and then try later. And I like to have other people make the really expensive mistakes so we don't have to do that. And so that's me being sneaky. But I'm going to Ohio soon, so I'm going to take a bunch of notes. There's been data on that. You're taking your 60-inch row, 30-inch row corn, you're taking that 30-inch row, putting on top of another, same seeding rate, and they're shooting for same yield or comparable yields and leaving enough sunlight in the row for the cover crop later on. That's the theory. The concern that I have in my region is that weeds are so prevalent and so aggressive that I'm very concerned about weeds taking over and being the majority of that mixture. And again, there's only so much sunlight, water, and nutrients in there, and the weeds will win that battle every time because they have advantages. They have an advantage of diversity, it's genetic diversity. I'm not saying there's anything against it. I'm skeptical. I think it's worth trying, but again, 2 acres or 20 acres, not 200 or 2,000. I think it's worth trying. If it's a 4-inch corn, go for it, right? Because cattle need lots of things. Actually, kosher has a very high 4-inch quality just for the time. So I'm not worried about it there. If you're looking for grain corn, I'm concerned about that. Because your cover crop has to establish, otherwise your weed control is going to suffer. So to me, there's a high risk there.
Beginning in your presentation, you have a slide of wheat and soybeans together.
Yep.
What was your seeding planting rates?
1 bushel.
What's that?
1 bushel of wheat.
What bushel wheat?
Is-
Did you compromise the soybean?
No, we planted them at the same rate. Same rate. And that grower hedge is a little high. He's at 150,000 per acre. And you guys are bilingual and that kind of math, so I'll let you do the translation. I found that out in Ontario that they do liters per acre. Like, wow.
Did you do that?
Wow. More power to you. Like I have trouble keeping the math straight in English or whatever. So I'll let you do the translating. Like pounds per acre is pretty much a 1-to-1, so that's easy. But yeah, that was where we're at. We left the soybean rate at the same. We should have probably reduced it because of the concern of white mold. So I'll say. However, the reason we didn't is the concern of being too wet and having stand issues with that. And Phytophthora is the main disease, reducing our stand. So we hedged a little bit. Like we consciously thought about what the rate was going to be.
I've read research that grains in soybeans and crops that are prone to white mold reduces the mold issues. Have you come across anything or?
I have not. I know that there are some things that are critical for white mold development. I have a lot of soybeans. So for 60% of the acres I watch are soybean. There's way too many, first of all. And that means there's soybean on soybean. And there are farmers that are over 15 years of soybean in a row, which is a terrible idea. I'm totally against it, but I don't make the call the shots. Now, what I know for white mold is that the host needs to be there, disease needs to be there. That's part of the disease triangle. The weather implications that we know, we need humidity, 48 hours of 100% humidity. We want cooler temperatures. And again, I'm not bilingual in temperatures, but 68 degrees Fahrenheit is kind of the level, okay? So cool. And then you also need necrotic tissue. And that typically happens at floweret time, where the flower petals flower and then those petals start to drop off.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of that. So those are the things that we know that we need. If the rain is significant enough to wash the spores off, it's potentially possible that you wouldn't develop it, but there's going to be a time frame in there where the rain is no longer happening and the humidity is high because of it. So I think we've seen that with soybean, and fungicide is a waste of time in my situation with soybean because they're susceptible for too long. Fungicide won't hold it off long enough. The answer is plant less soybean, honestly, is the first answer. Then there are second answers with row spacing and rear movement, but those are way down the list.
Well, I saw a crop once where the fellow had never grown chickpeas before, and his son got impatient while he was away and seeded a full crop of barley into the chickpea field. And when I was there, it was blooming flax because it had been flax the year before and it had been hailed. And so it was a full rate of flax, like the flax was thick, that's
Triple
what
the
you
rate
could
of
see,
flax,
with
full
the
rate of
barley
barley.
coming through, and underneath was solid chickpeas. And he was embarrassed about it. I said, you're gonna make a lot of money from this because you can clean it. He was certified organic.
Absolutely.
And he had no white mold, and the whole area had been stricken with mold that year. This was under pivot cultivation in southern Alberta.
So
And he said the barley had saved the flax and the beans from the mold.
So, and I don't know if Lena's here or not from Saskatchewan, but she can talk to Ascocida and flax and chickpeas wonderfully. I will let her do that. I think that there's a commonality. I don't think it's just the water. I think there's a lot more going on in that situation about leaf wetness and all that kind of stuff. This white mold's been studying fairly intensively. I'm not confident we know everything, but I'm confident we've got a pretty good handle on it.
Good, thank you.
Definitely speak with
Lena later. Okay, thanks.
I think I'm over time.